It is May 1968. The streets of Paris are in chaos. Angry crowds are burning cars and barricading roads, while the French public squares have been seized by protesters. This rebellion will soon be known as the May 1968 events, but it could have had an even more catastrophic name, Operation Heart Attack. On one hand, they were a major player in NATO and staunch allies with the United States. On the other hand, they were still bitter about losing their empire and wanted to assert themselves as a major world power. This desire for relevance was leading them to do some questionable things, like make Charles de Gaulle, who had been the hero of World War II, president again. At first, he considered sending in troops to restore order, but rejected it because he didn't want to kill unarmed civilians. The generals responded by saying, "It's too bad we don't have any." Basically, de Gaulle was having a midlife crisis, and he wanted to nuke France. But thankfully, his generals were too busy playing Risk to stop him. There simply weren't any nuclear weapons in the area. All of the nuclear arms were being kept far away at their military bases. He also knew that wouldn't work because most of the military were sympathetic to the protesters. He certainly considered it, but that doesn't mean he was actually willing to do it. After all, the country had endured 2 devastating world wars in the previous 30 years. When a new poll was conducted after the riots, asking what they thought about nuclear weapons, 61% said it was a good thing. While the author was in jail, someone broke into his house and set fire to his garden gnome collection. And as the firefighters battled the blaze, another person showed up. They tried to help, but when the firefighters looked over, they found that he had set the fire himself. He was arrested and sent to trial. Some American advisors wanted President Johnson to nuke North Vietnam. Israel supposedly considered nuking Athens during the 1973 Yom Kippur War. In 1945, the US dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japan, killing over 200,000 people. 3 days after the bombing of Nagasaki, Japan surrendered. Ending World War II. Whether or not the nukes were necessary is debatable, but there's no doubt that they ended the war quickly. But luckily, they didn't need to. By the time their Air Force got there, the fighting was already over. Thankfully, he never considered it seriously. But after he left office, President Nixon did drop some nuclear bombs on Vietnam, but they were small tactical nukes that were meant to level forests rather than cities. One biographer wrote, "De Gaulle never said anything that could not be interpreted as the expression of a desire to use force to restore order." Others point out that de Gaulle was famous for his love of dramatic gestures. And this may have been just another example. His defense minister urged him to declare martial law and crack down hard, but he rejected that idea as well. 84 countries believe nuclear weapons will exist in 20 years. 59 countries expect them to be used one day, and 37 countries think it will happen sooner or later. If that's not proof that France was dangerously close to nuking itself, I don't know what is. On May, he told his defense minister, "We must smash the cities," but nobody took him seriously, and in it, he explained why the country should reject nuclear weapons. After the book was published, the police searched his house and interrogated him for treason. Eventually, they let him go, but only after destroying the 4,000 copies of the book that had already been printed. In fact, they're the only European country besides Russia that has a fully fledged nuclear arsenal. Today, France has 290 nuclear warheads, and 58% of French citizens support keeping them. He brought in some elite special forces who cracked down hard on the protesters. But after things settled down, de Gaulle left politics in France, entered a period of economic stagnation known as the 1970s. The general in charge of nuclear weapons refused to move them, saying there was a good chance the rioters would seize them and use them against Germany or Britain. Even the Air Force commander said it would be crazy to move them. De Gaulle didn't want to risk a civil war. Instead, he considered using nukes, or conducting 240 nuclear tests in the Sahara Desert. But the French weren't ready for nuclear war. Their army was only equipped with 27 slow and inaccurate missiles. On May, the chief of staff said, "It is possible to have 4 nuclear missiles operational within 12 hours. 4 nukes wasn't enough to wipe out the entire protest movement, but it would certainly cause massive casualties. Plus, those big bombs can't fit into regular aircraft." So France spent the early 1960s developing new, smaller nuclear weapons that could be deployed from planes like the Mirage 4. And that's not hyperbole. That was the real code name of a secret plan to nuke Paris. Now, in terms of nukes, 400 isn't a lot. but this greatly increased the likelihood that France might actually use them. They developed a doctrine called a single shot, which held that a single nuclear strike was enough to destroy a country. In fact, they created a system called Operation Heart Attack, which would nuke Paris to end the threat once and for all. At the height of the student protests, the French president worried that the unrest would spiral into all-out war in the streets, so he wanted to flatten Paris with a nuclear bomb. But before we get into how close France came to nuking itself, if you're enjoying this video, please subscribe. It really helps me out. Thanks. In the early 1960s, France was in a bit of a weird situation. By 1967, France had 400 nuclear warheads that could be dropped from aircraft or fired from the ground. And then, in 1968, things started going wrong. It began with students protesting low wages and eventually turned into a larger movement against the government. It wasn't long before the streets of Paris were filled with protesters. Soon the unrest spread to the rest of the country. Factory workers went on strike, and there were riots in the streets. Before long, there were almost no government officials who hadn't been fired or quit. This is where Charles de Gaulle came up with his bizarre plan to just nuke France. He met with his top generals and told them he was considering deploying nuclear weapons. So de Gaulle asked if they could bring the nuclear weapons closer to Paris and stage a potential attack. As the rioting continued into its second week, de Gaulle became more and more convinced that only a nuclear blast could save France. In the end, the president's tantrum changed nothing. The nuclear weapons stayed put, and de Gaulle was forced to restore order the old-fashioned way. Now, whether or not Charles de Gaulle was serious about nuking his own country is debatable. What we do know is that France came very close to nuking itself. It's possible the French public would have accepted the nuclear attack, but not everyone was okay with this plan. A famous French author wrote a book called Bombardons la France, which translates to Bomb France. If you think that sounds insane, it gets crazier. The judge asked him why he did it, and the arsonist replied, "I read the book, and I thought it was a good idea. France has come a long way since then, and today they're a nuclear powerhouse." But France isn't the only Western nation that's considered nuking their own country. During the Vietnam War, France isn't the only country that considered nuking itself. Some nations, though, have had less luck avoiding nuclear attacks, and it looks like they're here to stay, according to a recent survey. Now check out how the last Soviet leader gambled away the Cold War, or watch this video instead.